and I'm a product owner at a VC-backed startup, former software engineer and startup founder. So if you are into tech or entrepreneurship or anything like that, career stuff, you're in the right spot. um, in this video, I just want to share a little bit about my experience over the last few years working as a product owner and product manager in VC-backed startups, because it's such a different experience working in the startup companies than like my larger corporate jobs. And then not only that, but I think working in VC backed startups specifically is very interesting because there's a lot of, I think, experiencing that hockey stick curve growth that everyone always talks about, that investors are always looking for. I think until you really experience it and have been a part of what that feels like, in terms of your day to day, it's kind of just this, I don't know, like, sort of ambiguous goal that we talk about, and you see it on charts and on graphs and on forecasting sheets and on people's pitch decks, and you hear about it in stories, but until you really feel it and the pain that comes with it in a lot of different ways, the pain of like learning and mistakes and trying to sort of handle that sort of growth and scale, it can be really hard to kind of imagine it. So just want to talk about that a little bit in this video, and yeah, just sort of reflect on the last few years, maybe like 3 years or so of working in VC backed startups, because I have two very kind of like different experiences. So the first VC backed startup that I worked for, I actually went out of business, and so I've gotten to experience that, where they raised a ton of money during the pandemic, like hundreds of millions of dollars, or at least $100 million, and still were not able to really like weather the storm in the market that they were in, and ended up being purchased by another competitor company, and that obviously had a lot of impact on people that worked there as well, including myself. But there were layoffs, and there was a lot of noticeable, visible stress that people were feeling as we got closer to that time, basically, where people end up getting laid off, and the company ended up eventually going out of business. But there was a lot of things leading up to that, right? A lot of initiatives that didn't really have what felt like direction that everyone was bought into. So it brought in sort of these like leadership questions, where, or like a lot of people, I think, were questioning leadership, or like didn't necessarily have a trust that we were having, um, that we were really going in the right direction from a leadership perspective. And that can be really tough when you're working in something, right? Because you care so much about your job and what you're doing, that you don't want your work to be for nothing, right? You don't want to do all this hard work and stress and put in late nights and sometimes weekends and all types of things just for something to not work. Like the overall broader initiative doesn't work. So when you have that sort of lack of product vision, or just like even business direction of like what your real value is in the market, what is your differentiating factor, why do people purchase your product or service over your competitors, or other people, um when that's not clear, it's funny what companies can do with a lot of money in the bank, right? Investment money, basically, where you can experiment a lot. You can hide some of the more painful, you know, really, I say you can ease the pain, is probably a better way of putting it. You can ease the pain of a lot of things with money, essentially. Doesn't make the problem go away. It definitely doesn't fix the problem, but you can buy yourself time for sure. And like I said, I think that was an interesting experience for me, of like actually sort of feeling that in the day to day of like, as a startup, the market is constantly shifting. People are releasing new things, like your competitors are releasing new things, new features, new products. They're doing deals, they're capturing market share like every single day. So one press release or one partnership from a competitor of yours could really, depending on how big it is, it could really have a huge impact on like your addressable market, or you know really how much sort of room there is for you to grow if you don't have, like I said, something that differentiates your product from everybody else in the market. So yeah, I mean, we were in the online like food ordering space, and so there were a lot of big players in that space, right? So the big ones that you already know of, like DoorDash and Grubhub and things like that, but there were tons of different like local delivery service providers, and during the pandemic, like ghost kitchens and virtual kitchens became very, very popular as a concept. So kind of the TLDR, if y'all don't know, a virtual kitchen is basically a restaurant and a brand, a menu for a restaurant that doesn't actually have a physical location. And what you do is you sell that brand, that logo, or the menu and all the ingredients, almost really like as a license to different restaurants who can then sell that same food, even though they own a pizza shop or something like that, they can still sell, tacos or Asian food or something like that on things like DoorDash and Grubhub, and people would never know that it came from the pizza place, essentially. So virtual kitchens, ghost kitchens became very, very popular during the pandemic. Um, and I think it was a very new space, a very new sort of like, I don't even know if you want to call it like a business model. Basically, it's a very new business model, and I think a lot of people were willing to try it at the time because it was new, and I think a lot of people were desperate during the pandemic, especially a lot of restaurant owners, and anything that could help them get more sales or increase foot traffic in their business, or at least online orders, they were willing to do it. And so I think a lot of companies, rode that a little bit during that time, but the ones who really, made it through the pandemic and are still growing and becoming, larger and larger players in the online ordering or like delivery food service, or delivery service provider space. Um, it they had to make very strategic business moves in order to really sustain how fast, like I said, the market was changing, that industry is changing, and consumer habits changing. So people just having less money with inflation to buy things online, right? You have to get smarter about, you know, how does your business model account for things like that? And so I'm saying all this to say that I was in a startup at one point that, we didn't have all these things figured out. Not to say that everybody does, but it ended up in us, in it not working out. And I'm grateful that I was able to get another job, where I am today at another VC backed startup, and I'll tell you about that one in a second. But I just think that entire experience, from, like I said, the stress and the speed of work, the pace of things, how fast things can change. Like, of course, that just comes with a startup in general, but when you have a rocky product vision, or the market, changes a lot, or you're heavily dependent on things like, discretionary spending, which is basically what a lot of people had during the pandemic when people weren't going anywhere and they couldn't go outside, and they were getting, money from the government and things like that, or didn't have to pay student loans. Like, people had more money to experiment with food online, and try different places, and take a shot at some things that they saw that were new on DoorDash or Grubhub or some other delivery service provider. But like I said, what works for a certain window of time is not always going to necessarily pan out in the long run, right? Um, so yeah, so that was very interesting. I learned a lot at that company and that job, and I'm really grateful, for the people that I worked with and I met there, and the problems I got to solve and work on, because it was a huge difference in, like I said, the expectations of work, and each employee too. I would say that even the level of efficiency of every employee was so much higher than what I was used to seeing at a huge corporation, where like it's so much easier to kind of like duck from responsibility and accountability and hide and sort of do just the typical day-to-day company culture things, or just get along with people and make friends and get coffee and have meetings and stuff like that, where you kind of like the real work kind of escapes you in a way, or it can anyways. There's no room for that, like in my experience in a startup. And granted, I haven't worked at maybe some of the hugest startups ever, so I can't say it's the same for all startups that are growing, or that are getting VC funding. Um, but I can say that it was a very different level of expectation of like performance, accountability, the pace and speed of work, and also just, people coming in the door were already more than proficient at their job. So that's something I hear a lot when I watch videos about people talking about the job market today. One of the things that a lot of people bring up is like, oh, jobs want you to have experience. They don't want to train you anymore. They don't want to do this. And honestly, at least for tech, and y'all tell me in the comments what you think, but I don't think training is really a thing at any job in tech. And expecting to be trained or get trained, or a company will be willing to invest their time and money into training you, the potential of training you, is just not, something I've seen since I've been in the startup world. So, in the startups that I've worked in, it's like you are hired expecting that you have more experience than essentially what is probably needed for the role, and you are able to come in on day one and make an impact. That's with no hand holding, no one showing you anything, telling you anything, pointing you to anything. You are going to dive in on your own as a self-starter, self-learner. You are going to self-pace, figure out everything that you need to know for your job. You're going to, take the initiative to meet all the people that you need to meet and form those relationships and those bonds. And like, um, yeah, you're going to ask the right questions at the right time. You're going to have a 90-day plan of how you're going to improve the job you were hired to do. So whatever was going on before you got there, you're going to be expected to improve it or bring something new to the team, the company that wasn't there before they hired you. And that's all expected just from the average person in these startup companies. So going in thinking that you're going to like learn or get experience or do this or that, like, is not really an option from what I've seen. And you really have to have, lived this startup life, or at least had some sort of experience in it, to be able to really handle the type of stress and the pace of work and the change of priorities and the uncertainty that really come with, or that can come with, working in a startup. uh yeah, so the startup that I'm at currently, we are also VC backed, much smaller company in terms of headcount than the first one. But I love that I know everybody in the company that I work with, which is super awesome to me. Um, Maybe I haven't met them all in person. I've met a great majority of them in person, but I still know everybody in the company on a first name basis, even if I don't work with them directly or talk to them directly. So it's really cool to sort of feel like you're on a team in that sense that is still small enough to where everyone knows everybody at every level. Um, I love that we are working on like very innovative things in our industry. And so just to get to see the impact of your work, for me has always been a really important thing. And I've felt that more strongly since working at startups than I ever did at larger companies, where even if you work on a really big objective or a big goal, it might not always be visible to everybody in the company, or they might not really understand the importance of it, or it might only affect a certain subset of people in a company, or something like that. It's not as rewarding to spend, a year or 6 months of your time on something that kind of just gets brushed off as like business as usual type of thing. So in startups, I feel like, the work that I do and the hard work that you put into solving these problems and dealing with people and navigating people, which is always a challenge in any job in any industry, um, to to really see the actual impact on the company or on the users, and to really hear people get excited about something. When we demo something that's coming up, or when we talk about, hey, we just released this thing, or we get, customer feedback that says like how much they enjoy something that we recently released, or something that we a problem that we solved for them. Like, that's super exciting. And then just to be able to compete, right, in any industry, even though it's very fast paced. Like I said, you have to constantly be looking at, what's changing, what's evolving, how you have to constantly be thinking 3 4 5 steps ahead, and especially about your differentiator, and really knowing who your audience is, what your value is to them, is super super important. But I would just say that, that is the excitement. You're working on things that are risky. You're working on things that are novel, like they haven't necessarily been done before, or if they have, they weren't probably done as successfully. The problem is being solved one way or another, but the fact that you have a chance to come like completely change the way people do something in their day-to-day life, and be a part of like building and thinking about how to solve those problems is just super, super rewarding to me. So I enjoy it a lot. It's given me such an opportunity to grow, like personally and professionally, by being just kind of thrust into such a high paced, fast paced, high pressure, high risk, high reward sort of environment. And I don't think it's for everybody, right? I obviously had a huge love of startups, and I still do, before I started ever working in them. And it's something that I just happen to really enjoy. And I also get to wear lots of different hats every day, which is something that I seriously enjoy as well. So like, even though my job is a product owner, I still get to wear 10 different hats on any given day, and those hats change every single day. So some days you're wearing UI hats, UI UX designer hats. Some days you're wearing technical writer hats. Some days you're wearing architecture, system design hats. Some days you're doing business analyst stuff. Um, some days you're doing customer support. Some days you're doing QA. And so every single day is just so different, and I personally love that because, again, you get to exercise so many different skills and develop those skills even more for future, obviously, jobs and personal, reasons as well. If you ever go start your own thing, you get to build on all these valuable skills because these things, you're doing relevant things to the real world. You're not doing things that just have become part of a company culture, over time, that's outdated, or like following old processes that don't work, or using old software that doesn't work anymore, that isn't popular, or that has just become a part of, some legacy process or legacy system at a larger company. They won't have any value, when you leave that company, or working on things that are proprietary to a large company, but won't give you any real skills when you go somewhere else. Like, those are the trade-offs of working at those bigger companies, or at least in my experience. And I know that they're not all like that, so I know people are probably going to try to roast me in the comments, but I'm just saying that in my experience, you can excel and grow in your career a lot faster in a smaller, fast-paced, high-risk, high-reward environment like startups. And for me, it's just been like a really great career transition. So I just wanted to really try to shed a little bit of like insight on that from just, my few years of working professionally in VC backed startups, and then coming from, non-traditional kind of product startup background with my own startup into like the formal real world of product management, product ownership, and things like that. So I hope that y'all found some value in this. Let me know down in the comments, what your thoughts are on this. But again, thanks y'all for coming in. Hit that subscribe button. Make sure you also check out the description box down below. Check out all my resources, all the links down there as well. And I'll catch y'all next video. All right. Peace.